Welcome to the Doyenne of Death Podcast, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. It's all about end-of-life issues and getting the conversation started about our 100% mortality rate. This series is hosted by Gail Rubin, certified thanatologist and the Doyenne of Death. A doyenne is a woman who's considered senior in a group and knows a lot about a particular subject. So here to talk about the subjects we sometimes avoid is author, speaker, and the Doyenne of Death, Gail Rubin.
Welcome to the Doyenne of Death Podcast. Glad to have you with us. And my guest today, we're going to be talking about widowhood and your finances. My guests today are Patty Desiderio, yes, and Doug Robinson. They have co-authored a book called the Not Just a Widow Guidebook. And I have read this book because I'm a good podcast host. I know to read the book before I do an interview. So, Patty, tell me about your widowhood story. How did you get involved in doing this book?
Oh, okay. Well, it all first of obviously my husband passed. My head was kind of in the sand when he passed. We were married 33 years.
And how did he die?
He passed away in a hospital. He was there for 18 days. He had cancer.
Okay.
And well, he had cancer for about a year, but, the body gave out. So we were 18 days there. So it was all a shock, even though you're there and you know it's going to happen. It's still very much so a shock.
Yeah.
So, all the things that had to be done. I had a promotional business at the time. And I was in a women's group, and women really helped me with, everything that needed to be done. The bankers, the attorneys, the funeral director, all that. They made my life, I wouldn't say at that point easy, but easier.
Yeah. Well, and I'm guessing Doug was involved too.
Well, yes, I right away called. I told him. He knew that Basil was very, very sick, and he was one of the first people I called because I got a call in the middle of the night from the hospital saying he passed away. So, the following morning I did call Doug.
And Doug, you are a financial planner that you worked with them, I guess.
Yeah, yep. Patty and I'd worked with Patty and Basil for at least a year. I'd have to go back and double check, the notes, but had been working with both of them, and not the first time, and certainly wasn't the last time that I'm usually one of the first people that's called. So Patty was not the first widow. Client or a client who was widowed as a client. So
in fact, let's talk a little bit about that. How prepared or unprepared do you see couples with their end of life arrangements?
It's typically you can't, Gail, you can't prepare for it. You can talk about it. You can do a little bit of planning. But the shock to the system that you experience as a widow, obviously I can't speak firsthand, but and that's kind of our partnership. Patty experienced it firsthand, and I'm the outsider looking in and interpreting, what I'm seeing. It's overwhelming, and you can't fully prepare for it. So there are some things you can do, obviously, to try to make the shock, less overwhelming. But
well, and I can tell you from my own experience, my husband died in April of 2023, rather unexpectedly after a surgery, and he had medical complications. But we had done our funeral planning the year before and prepaid for it. And I can tell you that makes a tough time a lot easier to bear.
It does.
I've been in a number of funeral homes over the course of my career as the Doyenne of Death. And the day I went into the funeral home with my brother-in-law to finalize the arrangements for Dave, I told Stephen, my brother-in-law, it feels different this time. Yeah. And I cannot imagine how people who have not made their arrangements in advance get through it. That makes it 10 times harder, at least.
Yeah.
Patty, had you done pre-planning?
No, we didn't have pre-planning, but the thing that saved me was a woman I knew because I was with a women's organization. And that's what saved me because right away I had called her that following morning. She said, "Don't worry about anything." She called the hospital and all that. So, and I went in and she took care of everything. But I had a relationship with her through business.
Mm-hmm.
But if I didn't, it would have been very, very different.
Well, and in your Not Just a Widow guidebook,
Yes.
you have sisterly advice throughout the book.
Oh, yes, yes. I've had a lot of experiences through, just experiencing things that happened to me and kind of crazy, silly things that I say, sometimes you just, and I know this is rough, but you want to slap somebody because they say to you, I'm sure you've had it, they say very stupid things like you feel like they're not sensitive to you when you're going through the grief, but they don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So I thought I would write about that, but backing up a little, how the book came apart. I was writing my story. I like to write. I wrote for a woman's newsletter for years. So I had started writing, and then Doug approached me in December. I don't remember what year. And he said to me, "Think about this." And I said, "Oh, good," because I already started writing. We should put it in a book to help widows and talk about all the things, the widow fog, when you go in and open up the will, when you, for instance, when I went to get my, his name taken off some bills, they told me, "Lady, I'll put his name second." I said, "How's that going to help me?" Different things that happen and getting all that paperwork. That's why we also talk about getting a guardian angel advocate. I had my sister because she's a bookkeeper and going through bills and doing all that because your mind, I didn't take care of it. I had a very traditional marriage. I didn't do any of that. So, very old fashioned or Italian and didn't pay bills and all that. So she looked at everything and got me started on doing, you got to pay the bills. Otherwise they shut the electricity off.
Yeah. Actually,
all that.
Yeah, let's have Doug weigh in on that financial part that widows have to deal with afterwards. It's a lot.
Hmm.
Well, it is, and I always say it's like the destruction. I mean, you have so many aspects of widowhood, that we talk about throughout the book. But we talk about this identity shift, that happens when someone's widowed. Every aspect of your identity changes in some way, and one of the aspects, of course, that changes is the financial. And I always say it's like a business partnership from that side of it that got dissolved, and all of a sudden, you're on your own. So everything has to be reevaluated financially from the perspective of, is this the right thing for me and my future? And the biggest challenge I think that widows face is that, we always talk about don't do anything, that's irreversible for the first 12 months at least. I think, Gail, you can speak to this as well, which is, a year ago, can you envision where your life is going to be in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years? And we always say, tell new widows you can't. And they don't really, I don't know if they really believe it or internalize it, but one of the points that we try to drive home, and that I try to drive home from a financial perspective, is you cannot plan that far in advance. You cannot see where you're going to be. And so don't make any sort of financial decisions, because you can't see that far, right? You want to give yourself options and choices. And so don't do anything irrevocable, irreversible, and give yourself time, to get through that transition and find yourself. And then a year or 2 or 3 years, depending on the widow, and what her life situation's like, you'll figure it out, right? But it's about options and choice, I think, leaving yourself that opportunity, to change your mind, right, as you figure things out.
Don't sell the house right away.
Don't give money. Don't sell the house. Don't give money away. Don't buy a second house. Major home improvements. Gail, we had a longtime client who husband died. He had Parkinson's, so it was a surprise, but not a surprise. Life insurance agent who they knew for a long time insisted on coming over to the house. My partner Brad and I were there at the same time. We're literally in one room. We were going through some documents, and she was talking to the life insurance agent in the other room. That guy started trying to sell her life insurance, new life insurance, it was so ridiculous. We were like, she doesn't need more life insurance, and it's grossly inappropriate to be even having that conversation right now. So, but, it's those types of things that in the moment, you're still numb, you're still in that fog and not quite ready to be making long-term financial decisions. So you got to fight that stuff. And it's tough to do when you're in the midst of it.
Well, and Patty has put together these 10 secrets of widowhood. And if we could, maybe make it available as a download in the notes for the podcast.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about a couple of those. In fact, your number one was about looking out for yourself and widow's fog.
Oh, yes, definitely. Because, self-care, that's the first thing. Make sure you order your prescriptions. Make sure you eat. Make sure you take care of yourself. Don't abuse pills. Don't abuse liquor.
Yeah.
Because I remember, I think it was the first year and a half, I did get sick. Colds. Very bad, about 3-4 times, something like that.
And stress, we know stress does so many, we talk about it in the notes, or the secrets. Stress is called the silent killer, right? But it has such an impact on your body that may not manifest itself right away. And Lord knows a widow is under a lot of stress. So
and it's bad for your heart.
Yeah.
And it's, and I think, Gail, this, kind of ties back to your, your message as well in terms of talking about this stuff. Widowhood, one of the things, and this kind of ties into just the, taking care of yourself, widows have a tendency to isolate themselves in their grief. And there's likewise, people don't know what to say to you. And so there might be a little bit reticent about reaching out and asking whether or not, hey, how are you doing? Just because it's so awkward, to see someone in pain and in grief. So, I don't think that that's healthy. Right. So, did you find, yourself, Gail, in that, position of stressed out and even though you did do the planning, your husband's death was slightly, was a surprise. So you had to have been just stress beyond belief.
Yeah, that first month, it was like moving through molasses. And
Yeah.
but
Yes.
I
Yes.
did cut myself some slack, and in fact,
Yeah.
I'm Jewish, and in the Jewish funeral
Yep.
tradition, you get a month to really retreat from
Yeah.
the world. I mean, and definitely that first week after the funeral is you don't even leave your house,
Mm.
and I think that's a wonderful approach that not everybody gets to take advantage of, but they should.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
and one of the other things that I had to deal with was starting to get rid of Dave's stuff, his clothes
Yeah.
and other things,
The purge.
the
Yes.
purge. And I wanted to make
Purge.
sure that whenever possible, it could go to a good cause. And it turned out he supported an organization that used live birds. It was called Talking Talons, where and I have a picture of Dave as a younger man holding this big hawk on his arm, and
Oh.
it was used to teach young kids about wildlife, but also about leadership. And this organization, I said, if you want to make a donation, donate to this organization. Well, it turns out they also have a thrift store that supports the organization. And they started a scholarship in Dave's name that
Oh, very
so
nice.
any donation I make to the thrift store would go to help support that scholarship. So I feel good about that. And
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yes, I sent things to Goodwill. My brother-in-law was here, so he packaged everything up, but I did save things.
mhm.
And I made a blanket. Now I'm making a teddy bear. I didn't save much, but I got rid of everything out of the bathroom. Looking at that toothbrush and the toothbrush holder will make you crazy.
Yeah.
And you feel like he's there or he's going to walk out or something. It's weird, but you try to get rid of. And then there are women who I've talked to 10 years down the road, everything is still in the same spot.
Right.
And that causes you need therapy.
Yeah.
I'm not being
Yeah.
rude, but I mean,
But-
not to be able to move on.
Have closure.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And the other
It's-
thing for closure too is we have a space for a grief journal. That has helped me too.
Good. Yeah. And
Right.
yes, Doug.
Well, Gail, I mean, that purge, I mean, I think, one of the things we try to focus on in the book, in reinforcing consistently, is that every widow walks her own path.
Mhm.
And, when the purge is a classic example of that. There are some things, like in Patty's case, there are certain things that are triggers around the house that you need to set aside because it's just a reminder that he's gone, right?
Yeah.
And then there are other things that the people just avoid. The widow just avoids, and so you stick it in a box and put it in a closet or the basement, and ignore it. I mean, I had a widow who she packaged up most of his stuff, put it down in the basement, and didn't really deal with it until about a couple of years later, when she had to, because she was moving, right? And so it was like, well, I'm not going to move all these things to the new house, right? So then that was her process of of going through his things and deciding what to do.
Right.
But so everybody's different, and
Yes.
take it at your own pace, and be careful of letting other people's expectations of what you should or shouldn't do, comments that people make of, why do you still have this stuff lying around? What?
None of your business.
What's your problem? Yeah, right.
Thank you. I was going to say that. That is
yeah.
none of your business.
Yeah, and so yeah, so if it's 10 years later, okay, I think we can all agree that that's perhaps a little bit.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that you want to hold on to for sentimental value, and everybody's situation is different. I mean, if you have children, Patty and Basil didn't have children, and I think that an important aspect of their relationship. I mean, so everybody's different, and
Yeah,
every
true.
every widow's walk is different. So do what you feel is right.
And one of your other tips, Patty, was don't become a bag lady. I'm sure a lot of widows
Well,
are afraid of that idea of.
well, they are, and I'll let Doug speak to this, but I want to tell you a very, very short story. Like, well, of course, don't sell the house, don't give away money. I had a friend who she decided, oh, I'm going to sell the house right away. She sold the house, moved to a condo. Then she had 10 grandchildren. She gave away money. Then all of a sudden, now she's strapped. She had to sell the condo. She moved in with one of her daughters. They made an in-law suite. So don't do anything stupid. You don't want it. And you are fearful. Will I have enough money? I don't want to live on the street or in a tent. I don't like bugs. So, but Doug can talk more about, exactly.
Well, and it's I mean, it's I always, and this is true about people, just finances in general. I always say the one thing that can really hurt your financial security is decisions related to housing, because it's such a big number.
Yeah.
Right. That when you screw up something on housing and you make a bad decision, the number is so big that it's really hard to, get out from underneath that. Right. And usually has to do with, buying too big of a house, buying a second house, too much of a mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. So, widows in particular can fall into that trap of, making a decision too early that really they can't recover from. And that's why, again, that first year or two of, don't make any huge real estate decisions, right? Now, right, sometimes you can't afford to stay in that house, right? If you're both working, 2-income household, that's how you were affording the mortgage. Maybe you got kids, financially, you might not be able to give, if your situation is such that, you can't, go a year covering that mortgage or whatever the situation is. Yeah. Okay. You need to sell the house, and that's what's right for you in your situation. But,
So,
it,
Doug, just a couple of tips on how couples could be better prepared for end of life issues. For me, life insurance comes to mind, but
yes, certainly. Yeah. Life insurance, can be a big help to bridge the gap. If that's depending on what your stage is, a big, a nice emergency fund, keeping cash, some savings on hand, and, $10,000-$15,000 would be wonderful, particularly if you don't have life insurance. And, we're, as couples, I've been married, almost 30 years myself. And as a financial advisor, this is certainly something that I'm not good at, in terms of both parties being aware of household finances, right? Guess who does most of it in my relationship? But that can be a big step, a big help in preparation. Patty, I mean, you can speak to this, right? I mean,
Yes.
Basil was, a man after my own heart, very organized and an
He was an
engineer.
engineer. He knew what he brought out the book when I had Doug come over the first time.
Right.
He had everything in order. That's not me.
Right.
But I did find, I didn't know what was going on. I kind of did towards the end, because he said, stop. You need to know. I said, well, you're not dying. And he said, and then afterwards, I found 2 accounts he had. I found 2 CDs, 3-4 years later. I got a notice. Oh, I didn't know he had one. See, because I didn't pay attention.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I thought it was just an Italian thing, and because I'm old, Doug.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
No, I mean, it is a generation. It is, and Patty,
it's
and
generational.
Gail,
I'm going to be 71. So,
right.
yeah.
And, I mean, I've certainly noticed, that younger women, particularly women who are in the who work, right, are much better. Those couples are much better about communicating, household finances, and it's not the, I'll say the older generation stereotypical husband takes care of all the investment stuff and the wife balances the checkbook type of thing. I mean, there's much more of a egalitarian, setup of the household. So because both spouses are contributing to retirement plans at work, both spouses have an income, both spouses have credit, and credit reports and, those types of things. So, so we're seeing less and less of that, old school kind of setup, but that is a big tip, is making sure to the extent that you have any sort of forewarning, everyone, both, particularly the spouse, the widow, knowing where everything is.
I'll give you a tip right now. We all have a 100% mortality rate. We are all going to die, so do this planning.
Well,
whether anybody's sick or not.
This is true.
And in fact, in my household, I was the one who did the finances. So in a sense, I was in a better position. And something that some funeral homes are doing these days is providing estate follow-up help. That happened with a funeral home that we use. They have a service that called me and walked me through different financial aspects for closing, handling the estate. And so that's a great thing.
And that's, I mean, we mentioned in the book, I mean, when Patty and I first started talking about the book, and obviously getting it into hands of, widows was, what we were trying to accomplish. And, one of the first things we said was, boy, if we can get the funeral homes, and to buy these in bulk, and during their aftercare, when they go and they have that follow-up conversation with the widow to say, here's, because one of the reasons that we put there's worksheets in the guidebook, for assets and liabilities, things you own, things, the different types of accounts that you have, income sources. We have all these worksheets in the book because, Gail, just like you were saying, I mean, it's so important to be aware of that stuff. And funeral homes have a great opportunity to help widows. We believe. And so rather than them having to reinvent the wheel and come up with their own stuff, we say, hey, here's the book, it's got the worksheets in it, just, give it out and, maybe just highlight it when you're talking to folks.
Instead of after somebody dies, maybe working with the pre-need planning teams for funeral homes to get it into people's hands. Because that's
absolutely
better before you've got a dead body on your hands than afterwards.
This is true. True.
So your website is notjustawidow.com. So people can get the book there, and I'm guessing Amazon, etc.
Throw the name into Amazon. We self-published through there. So, and for any funeral homes who happen to watch your podcast, we do offer bulk sales for the pre-planning and aftercare.
In bulk.
So, very good. Yeah. Well, Doug Robinson, Patty,
you're doing it good, Desiderio. It's fine. Just Patty. That's
Patty.
me.
Thank you. Thank you for talking today.
You're quite welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure.
And remember, everybody, talking about sex won't make you pregnant. Talking about funerals won't make you dead. Start a conversation today.
This is true.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gail.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us on the Doyenne of Death Podcast. You can find episodes of this podcast and past episodes of A Good Goodbye with Gail Rubin on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on Gail's work, visit agoodgoodbye.com.